Another banger details from Gene Deal, guys. He just went public with evidence about Tupac's shooting that 50 Cent refused to put in his Netflix documentary. We're talking about $1 million check, proof that Diddy knew Tupac would be shot, and the real story behind Biggie's murder. This is the information that was too dangerous for Netflix, but you're about to hear all of it right now. Look, I know you clicked on this video because you heard Gene Deal is dropping bombs that 50 Cent didn't want anyone to see. And trust me, you made the right choice. So without wasting time, here's what's going down. 50 Cent just sold his Diddy documentary to Netflix for millions of dollars. Everyone in the hip-hop world expected Gene Deal to be the main guy in it. Why? Because Gene was Diddy's personal bodyguard back in the day, and he's been the loudest person exposing bad boy secrets for years now. He was there when everything went down. But when the documentary dropped, Gene was nowhere to be found. Not a single interview, not one clip, nothing.
A new Netflix docuseries about Sean Diddy Combs is making headlines for its never-before-seen footage of the music mogul in the days before his arrest. Now, Combs is threatening legal action against the streamer for airing the unauthorized footage. Behind the series is Combs' longtime rap rival 50 Cent and director Alexandria Stapleton, who sat down with NBC News' Chloe Malas ahead of tonight's release.
And now, Gene is telling the world exactly why he's not in it. He's revealing footage, conversations, and evidence that 50 Cent completely censored from the final cut. And honestly, when you hear what he's saying, you'll understand why 50 might have been scared to include it. In this video, you're going to discover the real reason Gene Deal walked away from the documentary. You'll hear about the day Diddy knew Tupac was about to get shot and did nothing to stop it. You'll learn about $1 million check that Gene saw with his own eyes that connects directly to Tupac's murder. And you'll get the full story of how Biggie's murder was set up, including the warnings Gene gave that everyone ignored. This is big, so let's get into it. Before we dive into Gene's leaked evidence, let me show you something far more interesting. Now, this series was supposed to be over 10 episodes allegedly, but 50 Cent just dropped a 4-part Netflix series called Diddy: The Reckoning, with never-before-seen footage filmed days before Diddy's arrest. Now, we're talking private conversations with his lawyers, him greeting fans in Harlem, all the behind-the-scenes stuff nobody's ever seen, which was pretty okay. The documentary was supposed to expose everything Diddy did, every crime, every cover-up. But according to Gene Deal, it left out the most important stuff. So who's Gene Deal? Diddy's former bodyguard during the peak bad boy years. He was right there during the East Coast versus West Coast beef. He was in Vegas the night Tupac got shot. He was in LA the night Biggie got murdered. Gene saw it all firsthand. And now, Gene's not staying quiet anymore. He's leaking everything. So let's get into what he's revealing. Alright, so the first question everyone's asking is simple. Why isn't Gene Deal in this documentary?
To put her on blast because she was telling me, she was saying to me that what I was asking for was crazy and they wasn't spending money like that. I'm talking about you got footage, you got clothing, you got, I was doing footage, I had pictures, all the stuff that I had, you could figure out a way to pay her, brother, and stuff like that. And then I was telling her about some prices that I've already received and I had the invoices to show it. And then she was calling me like I was lying. I'm like, yo, who do you think you talking to? You know what I'm saying? And she was talking about, there's no way nobody paid. Nobody what? I say, first of all you people come with these documentaries and stuff, the first thing you tell me, y'all tell these people out here that y'all don't pay, and y'all pay. If you can make a picture look like $10,000, $15,000, you know what I'm saying? You can sit here and tell me that you're gonna pay me for my time sitting right down here with y'all. You understand? So then, one thing led to another, and I was like, all right, well then, F you, I spoke to 50, and then she said 50, and this is exact words that came out her mouth. 50 does not determine what goes in and goes out of this document.
Gene recently did an interview where he explained exactly what happened. He was actually working with the documentary team at first. They wanted his footage, his stories, everything. But then Gene had a conversation with the director, Alex Stapleton, that changed everything. According to Gene, she basically told him that 50 Cent had no control over the payments or the content. She made it clear that 50 wasn't the one making those decisions. And when Gene heard what they were offering him financially, he felt completely disrespected. Think about it from Gene's perspective for a second. He's got footage that nobody else has. He's got first-hand stories from being right next to Diddy during the most important moments in hip-hop history. And they're offering him what he felt was pocket change compared to what this documentary would be worth. So Gene walked away. He said no thanks and refused to participate. But here's where it gets interesting. Gene is now revealing that the documentary didn't just skip him because of money. They also left out massive pieces of evidence that Gene knows about.
Jake. Wolf was not the gunman who killed Jake, and Mark Curry knows that to be true. You understand? And East Coast War was more like Helena of Troy. When Puff got mad at Suge for being out there and allowing Misa to come out there to make money, however she was doing it, to feed her family, he vowed down that it's like, yo, I ain't never fucking with her again, and I ain't never fucking with him again. Puff and Suge had a conversation behind the House of Blues about was we all right, and Tupac was alive. Tupac wasn't dead. So if it was a war, Suge ain't having no conversation with Puff about we good. I know he could be doing a Hoboken hustle, trying to fool a brother, but had he killed my man or some shit like that, I wouldn't have no conversation with Puff. I'd been like, yo, you know what y'all niggas done? You know what happened? And it wasn't no conversation like that, brother. It wasn't no conversation whereas that, Suge made Puff feel like I'm gonna get you a payback for what happened to Jake. This was more so that Puff, for whatever reason, Suge, for whatever reason he was mad at Puff, and Puff, for whatever reason he was mad at Suge. It was between them two. It wasn't no whole East Coast wanted the West Coast dead, and the West Coast wanted East Coast to dead, because they still was going out, still chilling, still at places with each other. It was Bad Boy, and it was Death Row. It was no East Coast and no West Coast. West Coast dudes were still coming out on the East Coast getting love. East Coast niggas was still going out on the West Coast getting love. It was Bad Boy versus Death Row. And that's what it was, bro. And it was because of the two CEOs. But Suge tried to straighten it out. I gotta get at the Suge. The Death Row East Coast was going to bring in Eric B. It was going to bring in Big D. And those brothers was from the East Coast. So now they was looking for a representative to come to the meeting from Bad Boy so they could straighten out the shit between Pac and Big and Death Row and Bad Boy. And Puff is the one who refused. Puff is the one to refuse to send a representative or either come himself, and got mad at Zip and them because they were in the Mirage on 57th Street partying with Suge Knight. Got mad at them, and Zip hung up the phone on behind that.
But what you mean by Mark Curry? He know who killed Big J?
It was some Jamaican dude from the Bronx. He's dead now. The police end up killing him at Magic City. I don't know his name, but Mark Curry know that it wasn't Wolf.
But when I was looking at the documentary, Kirk Burroughs, he did confirm that Big, he didn't want to go to LA, and they was actually getting warnings not to go to LA. But Diddy, he wanted to go, man.
My man, yeah, we must have had warnings, man. I didn't know. I knew that we shouldn't be out there in the first place.
For example, the documentary talks about the East Coast versus West Coast war, right? But according to Gene, they completely censored the truth about bodyguard Jake Wolf's death. Gene says that Mark Curry knows exactly who killed Jake Wolf. It wasn't some government conspiracy. It was a Jamaican guy from the Bronx, who the police ended up killing later at a club called Magic City. Gene also says the whole East Coast versus West Coast war narrative is wrong. It wasn't a regional thing. It was specifically Bad Boy Records versus Death Row Records. It was about Diddy and Suge Knight beefing with each other. East Coast rappers were still going to the West Coast and getting love. West Coast artists were still coming to New York, and everything was cool. But Bad Boy and Death Row, that was real beef. And here's something the documentary completely skipped. Death Row was actually trying to make peace. They wanted to set up a meeting to squash the whole thing between Tupac and Biggie. But Diddy refused to send anyone to the meeting. He wouldn't go himself, and he wouldn't send a representative from Bad Boy. Gene is saying all of this got cut from the documentary. And honestly, I can see why 50 might have been nervous about including it. Because what Gene's really saying is that Diddy could have stopped all of this violence, but he chose not to. Now let's get into the really explosive stuff. This next part is where things get absolutely crazy. Gene Deal is claiming that Diddy knew Tupac was going to get shot at Quad Studios, and he was literally there to watch it happen.
Talk about the whole incident of the Quad Studio shit. Like in the documentary, they was talking about that, right? You know what I'm saying? They talked about the Quad Studio shit. But they didn't mention the fact, and they left it out, that Big and C's did not know that Puff and Andre Harrell was in Jimmy Henchman's office the day Pac got killed. The day Pac got shot at Quad Studio. Let me repeat that again so it don't get mixed up in the whole thing. They did not mention that Andre Harrell and Puff Daddy and Jimmy Henchman were all in the office together. Puff was on the office because he was trying to spy on Big them, because Big was writing the Junior Mafia stuff and Puff had his publishing. I told this to a couple of people before. I said it before, and you got people that's running with it like they knew the story in the whole 9 yards. You understand? They'll lie and you ask them, how do you know that? Who told you? They couldn't even tell you that. They'll tell you some lie, they did some kind of investigation, but it didn't happen like that. You understand? Puff was there to spy on Big because he had owned Big Publishing, and Big had turned around, and the same people who helped Puff get Big Publishing told Big to turn and put Tatiana or put somebody else's name on his publishing, or give it to Lil C's or whoever, this, that, and the third that he wrote for, so he can get the money from it. So that's how that went down. So they was there to spy on Big. In the interim of him being there to spy on Big, Jimmy Henchman told him that they finna teach Pac a lesson, because Pac had owed him some money. So that's why he was up in the studio and was coming to the studio. Pac owed him some money. He was gonna work it off and get some money from doing a song with Lil Sean. And that's what that was about. But Pac was talking greasy to Jimmy Henchman, and Jimmy Henchman wasn't the type of dude that you talk greasy to, allegedly. Unless you're 50 Cent.
So Diddy knew what was going to happen to Pac.
He knew Pac was about to deal well. Yeah, he was there to see it. He wasn't only there to see Big them. When Jimmy Henchman told him that, he was there to see what's going to happen to Pac. He was there for that. Because had he not been there for that, he would have went up there in the office. He would have went to the studio or the studio session with Big them. He would have went to that studio session with Big them. He knew what room Big them was in. He didn't do that. He was there to see what was going to happen to Pac after Jimmy told him. And that's factual.
Gene says that the documentary talks about the Quad Studios shooting, where Tupac got shot 5 times back in 1994. But according to Gene, they left out the most important detail. Diddy, Andre Harrell, and Jimmy Henchman were all in Jimmy Henchman's office together that same day. Now, Gene is very clear about this. Biggie and his crew didn't know that Diddy was in that office. Diddy was supposed to be going to the studio session with Biggie, because Biggie was working on Junior Mafia stuff. But instead, Diddy went to spy on Biggie. Why was Diddy spying on his own artist? Because Diddy owned Biggie's publishing rights, and Biggie was trying to get out of that deal. Some people had advised Biggie to put the publishing under someone else's name, maybe his wife Tatiana, or maybe Lil C's, so he could get the money himself, instead of Diddy taking it all. So Diddy was in Jimmy Henchman's office, keeping tabs on what Biggie was doing. But while Diddy was there, Jimmy Henchman told him something. Jimmy said they were about to teach Pac a lesson, because Tupac owed him money. See, Tupac was supposed to come to the studio to work on a song with Lil Sean to pay off this debt. But Tupac had been talking greasy to Jimmy Henchman, and Jimmy Henchman wasn't the type of guy you disrespect.
And this is where Gene's claimed it's really serious. Gene says that Diddy knew what was about to happen to Tupac. Jimmy Henchman told him the plan. Now, if Diddy didn't know what was going down, what would he have done? He would have gone upstairs to the studio session with Biggie, right? He knew exactly what room Biggie was in, but he didn't go up there. Instead, he stayed in Jimmy Henchman's office and waited to see what would happen to Tupac. Gene says this is straight facts. Diddy was there to witness Tupac getting shot. He knew it was coming, and he didn't warn anyone or try to stop it. The documentary completely left this out. But Gene also explains why Diddy had so much hatred for Tupac in the first place. And honestly, it makes a lot of sense when you hear it.
That hate stemmed from wanting to be him, idolize him off, he idolized Tupac, because you got to realize when a woman looked at Tupac, they probably wanted him. Puff wasn't getting that type of fever from girls. You understand what I'm saying? Puff had to use his money. Puff had to use his position in order to get women. Now, I seen him with some bad joints, and I used to look at them like this, like, not on no hating shit, but like, you wouldn't be here if he wasn't puffed.
According to Gene, Diddy was jealous of Tupac. And I'm not talking about being jealous of his rap skills or his fame. I'm talking about being jealous of how women responded to him. Gene says that when women looked at Tupac, they wanted him naturally. Tupac had that magnetism, that presence. He could walk into a room and women would be drawn to him without him even trying. But Diddy? Gene says Diddy had to use his money and his position to get women. Gene remembers walking women to the door after they'd been with Diddy, and he'd be thinking to himself, you wouldn't be here if he wasn't Puff. If this man had no money, you would not be coming out of this room. Gene even says that Diddy told him straight up one time, I don't know how to talk to women. I don't know how to talk to girls. That jealousy was real.
And according to Gene, it played a big role in everything that happened between Diddy and Tupac. Now, Gene doesn't just have theories. He's got physical evidence that he saw with his own eyes. And this is where things get really interesting.
Showed me and my man Boondang, aka my man Slick, a check for $1 million. We don't know, and everybody trying to say, lying, talking about half of it got paid, 500. I don't know. I know when I asked him about, we asked him, do we ask? No, we didn't ask him. I know when he showed us the check and he walked away after he showed us the check for the $1 million, you understand? I asked Boone, I said, yo, Boone, when did he get a record label? He said, you know how Zip is. I said, when did he get a Zip record label? Zip had a check for $1 million. He said he got it from Barry Hankerson and Jimmy Henchman for his record label, Black Ground Records. So now, if that's true, we know Jimmy Henchman and Puff was cool. You should be able to trace $1 million if that's the truth. If that's the truth, you should be able to trace that.
Gene talks about a specific incident that happened on 112th Street. He was sitting on a stoop with another guy, and a man named Eric Zip Von Zip came walking up. Zip was showing off a new car he had just bought, looking all proud of himself. But then Zip pulled something out of his back pocket. It was a check, and not just any check. This was a check for $1 million. Gene and his friends saw it with their own eyes. Zip was bragging about it, showing it off like it was a trophy. Now, here's what Zip told them. He said he got that $1 million check from Barry Hankerson and Jimmy Henchman for his record label, Black Ground Records. And when did this happen? Right after Tupac's death. Gene is saying that if law enforcement really wanted to solve Tupac's murder, all they have to do is trace that check. This wasn't cash being passed around in a dark alley. This was an actual check that had to go through a bank. There's a paper trail. You can't just cash $1 million check at a check cashing place. That money had to go through official channels. It had to be signed over to someone. And all of that leaves records. Gene is basically saying the evidence is sitting right there if anyone wants to follow it.
Maybe he can help law enforcement on how, if Diddy had anything to do with breaking that money up or giving that money up to him like that. Or did he use somebody else? Or did he do something for somebody else to be able to get that money for that? We don't know.
I was just about to say that too. Keefe D, he can use him for the upcoming trial.
Well, Kirk was meticulous in always keeping notes and files and things like that. But that money can't, just do a trace on $1 million check. Just do a trace on them. I want them to do it because that would prove that I saw $1 million check. That would prove. Just do a trace on it. The man dead now. What you gonna do? Do a trace on it.
And there's someone else who might know even more about this money trail. Kirk Burroughs, who was the president of Bad Boy Records, apparently kept very detailed notes and files about everything that went down. Gene mentions that Kirk said he paid for people to drive out to Las Vegas around the time Tupac was killed. Now, Gene says he doesn't remember that part personally, but if Kirk has those records, that could be huge. Gene says it's hard to hide $1 million. If Kirk knows about money being moved around, if he has documentation about who got paid to do what, then he could be the key witness that finally cracks this case wide open. The question is, will anyone actually investigate it? Or is this evidence going to stay buried, like it has been for almost 30 years? Alright, now we're getting to the part that's going to blow your mind. Gene Deal was literally there the night Biggie got murdered, and the story he tells is completely different from what most people think happened. Before they even went to Los Angeles, Gene got warnings that something bad was about to go down. He got a phone call from a guy named Waysworth Hall, whose street name was Unique. This dude was a major drug kingpin, and he was locked up in federal prison in Colorado with El Chapo at the time. Unique managed to get a phone call through to Gene, and all he said was 2 words, "Vest up." Then the phone hung up. Now, when the feds detect a 3-way call, they click it off and hang up the phone. So Gene called back the woman who had connected them, and she confirmed it was really Unique from Mecca Audio. Unique got another message to Gene through her. He said, "They're coming out. They're coming to get y'all." So Gene called Kirk Burroughs and told him they needed more security. At the time, they only had 4 security guards total for Diddy, Biggie, and their whole crew. That's not nearly enough. But when Gene asked for more security, Diddy said no. He wasn't buying it. He refused to hire more protection. Then Gene got a second warning from Chaz Williams, who told him the same thing. "They're coming at y'all." Gene knew there was beef for multiple reasons. There was beef because of what people thought happened to Jake Wolf. There was beef because of a phone call Biggie made that got the Winter Bagel in New York shot up. There was beef from some Muslim guy that Diddy had an argument with at Soul Train. And of course, there was beef because of Tupac's death, and the fact that everyone thought a Crip killed him, and Bad Boy was rolling with Crips. So Gene knew the danger was real. He decided he had to tell Diddy directly. Gene went to Andre Harrell's house, where Diddy was staying. Diddy came down the stairs wearing a white Beverly Hills hotel robe that he had clearly stolen from the hotel. Gene even laughed about that in his interview. But then Gene got serious. He said, "Yo, Puff, I got some intel, bro. I have some intel that people are gonna come and try to kill us." And you know what Diddy said? "Gene, I don't want to hear that shit. I don't want to hear that shit, Gene." Gene was shocked. He said, "What do you mean you don't want to hear that shit?" And Diddy told him, "Yo, Gene, you ain't gotta go if you don't want to go." Then Diddy got up from the table and walked out the door. Gene later found out from Clark Kent, who was a DJ and a vice president at Motown Records, that Clark was in Biggie's room the night before he got murdered. Clark asked Biggie what he was going to do, and Biggie told him, "D-Rock and Puff set this party up for me to go to." So this party wasn't a random thing. It was specifically arranged. At the Peterson Museum, Gene was on high alert. He saw bloods everywhere. He had his gun out, holding it behind his back. But then Diddy told him to get in the car. Gene said, "How the fuck are you gonna tell me how to do my job?" Diddy threatened him. He said, "Get in here, or you ain't gonna work another day for Bad Boy." So Gene got in the car, but he was furious. He told the driver, Kenny, "Run the next 3 lights. Run the next 3 lights, Kenny." He wanted to get away from the area as fast as possible. But as they went across the light, Tone, who was behind Gene, said, "Yo, Big's name ain't coming across the light." Somebody pointed a gun at Big. Then they heard the shots. Pop, 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 pop. Kenny gunned the car forward. Gene was yelling at him. "What the fuck are you doing, Kenny? They're shooting at Big." Kenny eventually did a U-turn and came back. By then, all the doors on Biggie's car were open, except his. Everyone had jumped out. Gene and Tone jumped in another Suburban and chased after the shooter's car, but they lost them. When they came back, Gene found out that there was a hospital just 2 blocks away from the Peterson Museum. But Kenny drove them to a hospital that was 30 minutes away. Think about that for a second. Biggie was shot and bleeding, and instead of going to the hospital that was 2 blocks away, they drove for 30 minutes. Gene's last words to Biggie were, "Whatever y'all do, don't let him go to sleep. Keep him up." And Biggie's last words were, "Just do it." Gene believes that if they had gone to the closer hospital, Biggie might still be alive today. Now, Gene makes it clear that he doesn't think Diddy personally pulled the trigger on anyone. But here's what Gene is saying.
Just seems strange. Could Puff have been involved in Tupac's murder or Biggie's murder?
I think that when you set up an atmosphere for something to happen, how involved are you? You set up the atmosphere. You put people in positions to get hurt. He knew that somebody was going to do something. He was told. I told him before we left. I told him. Mace told him. See, people ain't telling. See, everybody think that Gene Deal is the only one know this shit. I'm not the only one that's noticed and privileged to this information. I'm the only one that's speaking on it and has spoke on it. Now, people are coming out gradually, but when Puff set up an atmosphere for somebody to get hurt and they get hurt, don't you take some responsibility for that?
Is that more tactics? He's not going to pull the trigger. He might not even pay someone to do so, but like releasing that song, Who Shot You, that creates an atmosphere, creating certain things and planting seeds in somebody else's mind to be number one, where Tupac ends up getting killed, Biggie ends up being killed.
When you set up an atmosphere for something to happen, you're responsible for it. Diddy put people in positions where they would get hurt. He knew somebody was going to do something. Gene told him. Mace told him. Other people told him. But Diddy did nothing to stop it. Gene says people think he's the only one who knows this information, but that's not true. There are other people who were there and saw what happened. Gene is just the only one who's been willing to speak on it publicly. Think about all the ways Diddy created the conditions for violence. He released songs like Who Shot Ya? Right after Tupac got shot, which threw gasoline on the fire. He refused to attend peace meetings that could have squashed the whole beef. He took Biggie to LA even after multiple people warned him it wasn't safe. And according to Gene, Diddy was present when violence was being planned and did nothing to warn anyone or stop it. Gene asks a simple question. If you set up an atmosphere for somebody to get hurt and then they get hurt, don't you take some responsibility for that? He's not saying Diddy pulled a trigger. He's not even saying Diddy paid someone directly, but by creating certain situations, by planting seeds in people's minds, by refusing to make peace when he had the chance, Diddy set things in motion that ended with both Tupac and Biggie getting killed. So now the big question is, why would 50 Cent leave all of this out of his documentary? There are 3 main reasons. First, there's the legal issue. Keefe D is literally on trial right now for Tupac's murder. If 50 included all of Gene's claims in the documentary, his lawyers probably freaked out. They might have told him that putting unverified allegations in the documentary could interfere with an active federal investigation.
That could bring a whole world of legal problems down on Netflix and on 50 himself. Second, there's the credibility factor. Look, 50 Cent wants this documentary to be taken seriously. He wants it to be like Surviving R. Kelly, something that actually has an impact. Gene Deal is entertaining as hell, but some people think he's a conspiracy theorist. Some folks don't believe everything he says. So maybe 50 decided to remove Gene to keep the documentary bulletproof against Diddy's lawyers.
And speaking of Diddy's lawyers, they already sent a cease and desist to Netflix. They're calling the documentary a shameful hit piece and claiming that Netflix used stolen footage. So 50 was probably trying to avoid giving them any more ammunition. Third, and honestly this might be the biggest reason, there's the money. Gene wanted to be paid what he felt his footage and his story were worth. And 50 Cent is a businessman. If Gene was asking for too much money, 50 probably just decided to cut him out and tell the story without him. It's that simple sometimes. Business is business. Now, while all of this is going down with Gene's revelations, there's other drama happening too. Diddy apparently sent 50 Cent flowers at Club 11 in Miami. But these weren't just regular flowers. According to someone who works as a funeral director, these were funeral arrangement flowers. Look, I don't know about you, but after going through all of this, I believe Gene Deal is telling the truth. He's got too many specific details. He was actually there when these things happened, and he's been consistent with his story for years. Gene just exposed evidence that 50 Cent either couldn't or wouldn't include in the Netflix documentary. From Diddy knowing about Tupac's Quad Studios shooting before it happened, to that $1 million check that proves there was money behind Tupac's murder. From the multiple warnings before Biggie's death that everyone ignored, to how Diddy created the atmosphere that led to both murders. This evidence was too explosive for the documentary. Maybe it was too risky legally. Maybe it would have hurt the credibility. Maybe Gene wanted too much money. Whatever the reason, 50 left it out. But Gene isn't staying quiet. He's putting it all out there for the world to hear. Now, I want to know what you think. Comment down below. Do you believe Gene Deal is telling the truth? Do you think Diddy was involved in Tupac and Biggie's murders? What do you think is going to happen